Lufia is one of those game series that's somewhat underrated and sporadic when it comes to its releases. You have Lufia and the Fortress of Doom in '93 for the SNES, the prequel in Rise of the Sinistrals in 1996, again for the SNES, The Legend Returns in 2001 for the Game Boy Color, The Ruins of Lore for the GBA in 2003, and a disappointing reimagination of Rise of the Sinistrals for the DS in 2010. So it took 10 years for them to either get the funding or the interest in the series to pick up so they could complete their story. They also trashed the franchise with Curse of Sinistrals, the aforementioned DS game, but that's beside the point. The point is that this is definitely a franchise that is very much a cult classic. So today I'm going to take a look at one of these games in the Ruins of Lore for the Game Boy Advance. The history of the game itself is yet another botch from Wikipedia. Wikipedia mentions a company called Atelier Double as the developer, while other sources like IGN lists Taito as the developer. I'm somewhat confused but not surprised. Upon further searching, Atelier Double didn't even touch the Lufia games. In fact, every other review site either credits Taito as both the developer and publisher, or a second company in Neverland Company Limited as the developer. Neverland is also credited for developing every other Lufia game in the series besides Ruins of Lore. Someone really needs to get their shit straight. Like, come on, guys. Now that I've gotten off topic for so long that it has a paragraph, let's move on to the development of it and the story, which is not all that interesting. It was developed by Taito, but publishing rights were handed down to Atlus and released in 2003. Who's Taito, you may ask? Well, if you grew up in the 80s and early 90s, these are the guys who developed Bubble Bobble, Rainbow Islands, the iconic Space Invader games, and the list goes on and on. This company is an iconic development team that is still around today. Too bad Square Enix now owns them. They bought the company around the time they were about to drop money into crap like Final Fantasy 13. They bought them so they could have a better foothold into the Korean market. Too bad this pretty much led to the nosedive they are now. Last I heard, they had to drop 2 subsidiaries of the title because of Square Enix's stupidity. Square Enix employed Vince McMahon style tactics that I would never see today. As for Atlus, these guys are the modern day equivalent of working designs. They make these cult following kind of games that make enough money in North America to be viable. They had some problems where they almost went out of business, but someone went out, bought them, and pretty much let them run free. That someone was Sega. Thank you, Sega. It almost makes up for games like Shining Tears and Shining Force EXA. Anyway, it was released in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance. At this point, we had already had a new Pokemon game. The 2 Breath of Fire games came out in 2001 and 2002. Golden Sun was out with its sequel, The Lost Age, on its way. And all these are considered classic GBA RPGs. So it seemed to be an okay idea for Atlus to publish a game from a series that most would say is underrated. So, out comes Lufia and the Ruins of Lore. The plot of the game takes place 20 years after Lufia Rise of the Sinistrals, with a continuity frame of 101 years between the first part of the plot in Fortress of Doom and the last part of the plot, Legend Returns. There's a lot of room for breathing. According to Wikipedia, after the defeat of the Sinistrals by Maxim, the world has enjoyed a season of relative peace. However, this is threatened by when the Kingdom of Graze, a growing military superpower, allies itself with a mysterious man named Ragul and declared war on its warring nations. Their primary goal is to scour the world in search of a powerful monster simply known as the Beast, that once under their control would all but ensure the conquest of the world. You play as Eldon, a young man who, during this age of conflict, is traveling the world in search of adventure and intrigue. On a journey, he meets a young priestess named Rubis, who is searching for mystical shards and stones that will allow her to enter the fabled Holy Land. One of these places she must go to obtain one is Virgo's fortress. Once they meet the despot, they realize that if the world is to ever be at peace again, that Virgo must be stopped at any cost. Yes, I know it's cliche, but the plot picks up from here on out. The graphics are pretty good for a 2003 handheld game. The game uses a similar engine to Rise of the Sinistrals and executes it pretty nicely. The world is beautiful. Sure, it's pixelated on a big screen, but it interprets the world of Lufia pretty dang well. The top-down view feels like a brighter version of the SNES classic. Everything has an animated art direction that doesn't really age. If you told me it was released in 2005 or 6 on the Game Boy Advance, I'd pretty well believe you. Monsters are cool and have a fair bit of detail. I will admit the cliche of random encounters kind of tends to have them get somewhat old, but it's still a solid looking game. Bosses menacing in that Lufia Rise of the Sinistrals way. I think some people may have issue with how cute the game looks at times. I think this is more of a compromise between the art style of the series and the capabilities of the Game Boy Advance. Sure, there are some darker looking levels. The thing is that in general, it looks a tiny bit more kiddie animated than what the series is known for. Now, this is just my theory, but I think the reason is that title went with more bright colors because of it's on a small screen, and you're probably playing in places with pretty bad lighting. Just a bit of a hunch. It's still a fine looking game that I really have no problems with the whole art direction or the graphics in the game. The audio is also solid. Title wanted this game to still feel like a Lufia game. Part of it that being some of the music sounds like it's part of the world Lufia is set in. The one minor problem is that some of the music kind of feels like it was copied from Rise of the Sinistrals. Sure, it's on a new system, the last one came out in 2001, and the main plot goes back 8 years before that. My problem is that if you're a longtime fan of the series, at this point you may be tired of the same battle music for the last 3 games that lasted 40 to 60 hours. This can be remedied by not playing them back to back. Other than that, it's going to feel like me and an old friend that you haven't seen in a while, but kept all the cool elements you liked about it. The gameplay is a mixed bag. Fundamentally, it's Rise of the Sinistrals, but they tried to refine the game, and it has mixed results. It's a turn-based RPG much like the aforementioned game. You have a maximum party of 4 at any given fight. You start off with 2, but you get access to a monster capturing system when you pass the early part of the game. More on that later on. Every fight you enter, you can choose to fight, run, or switch your current character. You have 5 basic attacks that you choose to fight. Those are being a basic attack, defending for the turn, using a special attack or spell, using an item, or to fuse with your monster. Again, more on that later. It's fundamentally a good game. It's also a very challenging game. What you need for equipment doesn't always drop from enemies, and you could end up grinding for a while. The game's something that not too many JRPGs do, that you can avoid every fight. You can also pull off surprise attacks before fights, but so can your opponents. Add on the fact that all the attacking party members get to attack for the defending party group, and the game will punish everyone for bad movement in dungeons. I like this retained element from Rise of the Sinistrals because if I'm about to die in a dungeon, I don't want to have to pray to the random encounter gods to save my stupid butt from fights. This also allows you to cut down on the fights in case you feel the game's too easy. There's a new job system in the game. Every character can get a job class and get different abilities from them. There are bonus classes you can unlock by having mastered a class early on. The only drawback is that you really have to commit to that style of class. Some classes will reduce stat points in different areas, giving it more of a you must commit to this character, to this kind of class. I like it in that you can early on decide what is going to play what role, who is going to play what role in your party. The monster capturing system turns in this game. This time around, it borrows elements of Pokemon and other games. Each monster can use weapons, armor, and over time develop a bond with the character he's protecting. You evolve your monsters twice. After you evolve them to a 2-star monster, you can use a fusion move. This fuses your monster and yourself together for 3 turns. This is at the cost of a full IP meter, which is built by taking damage. Bear in mind that you can only have one monster paired up with the character. There's a problem with the fusion move, which I'll get into later. Monsters have a maximum of 8 moves at a time. You select 3 of them as your main attacks, and the other 5 are your reserve moves for strategic plans. You can get them through learning or transferring them from other monsters. The only drawback to transferring moves is that you have to give up the monster that you are moving the attack from. So don't get too attached to most of the monsters in the game that you capture. Now, here's how the recruitment system works. It's not like a game, for example, Pokemon, where you weaken it, then chuck a Pokeball and it's yours. Not only do you have to use a Pokeball equivalent, known as a disc, but depending on what type of area you are in, you need to have the type of disc to capture the monster there. For example, if you are in a field, you need a field disc. The thing is, there's 2 sides to capture monsters. On one hand, it immediately joins your party. On the other hand, you get no experience for that capture monster. So pick your poison. Now, I got no problems with the whole specific disc system, having to lose your monster when you are transferring moves and everything else. While I think it only exists as padding, it's nothing compared to how I think the system is yet another challenge to overcome to finish the game. The monster recruitment system is pretty well useless, and I'll go into why right now. You might as well be babysitting. You know those monster moves? Those moves might as well be in a slot machine. You have no direct control over your monsters at all. They will run away in the middle of a fight, use healing moves on themselves, and hell, if they had access to your inventory, they would waste all your items. Thank God they can't. The next problem is that you know that fusion move you got? Well, for that big bad monster you get, you have no control over it. So if you get something that can't attack like a giant jelly, you're sitting duck, burning turns for nothing. Another problem is that the monsters only get 1/4 of the experience your characters get when you have a full party out there. So if your monster has a mangina and runs all the time, he will take forever to load off. To top it all off, if you have no room in your reserves and you use a disc, the game will count it as a wasted link. This left me many times scrambling to go back to town to figure out if I have any room left in my reserves. The thing that seals the label for the monsters as useless is that the equipment they get, you can only access through the biggest dick move and optional dungeon that I have ever played in my life. I know this dungeon is optional and you can get monster equipment early on. The problem is that this is the most brutal optional gimmick dungeon I have ever attempted. Also, I know there was one Fortress of Doom, but only took half your gold and you had to use a separate inventory. This also allowed you to use healing items you got in the dungeon outside of fights. Whereas this dungeon has so many cheap shot moments that if you're not ready, you're screwed. The rules to this place are simple, but there's quite a few. The rules to this place are very, very simple. You can go as deep as you can. You can only bring 10 items from your inventory. You can't go into any options menu between fights. Only before the floor and during fights can you use items. Number 4, every floor has a boss. Number 5, the only way to escape is to die or to use an item called Providence, which are in these dungeons. If you do use it, you can start from any floor you completed so far. You also keep all earnings and all our items picked up. Plus, this dungeon has about 30 floors, so you know, it's not completely the biggest dungeon out there. Number 6, if you die, you lose all earned items, money, and equipped items on you. Number 7, only one human character can enter at a time. This means you go with the monster that's equipped with them at that very specific moment. This is relentlessly dickish. You mean the 1 hour I spent getting money to pay for my equipment for nothing? Because your stupid dungeon couldn't bother to throw me a Providence so I could get out? There's a difference between risk versus reward and betting the house on something that is really not worth it. Why would I ever go and use your stupid dungeon? Well, there's a reason besides the armor. There's a specific item you need to get. These are used for jobs at the same place you get your starting classes. The rewards are really not worth the risk in my opinion. To get 300 coins you risk your equipment. I shouldn't let this bother me, but that's because it's optional. The problem is that these monsters are such a big part of the game. Their level boosts are so minimal that unless you spend all your stat upgrade items, that they're going to be a lot of lucky hits. If you ask me whether or not it's worth it, I wouldn't bother unless I was using save states. Enter at your own risk. The biggest problem I have is that the game has this weird looking loading issue. You can't blast your way through a conversation. You have to wait until the next line of dialogue pops up, then proceed with the conversation. This is very minor, as you can speed up how long conversations last, and it kind of helped me pick up on certain plot points and keep myself from getting lost. Unfortunately, this is also the case with the fights. Attacks take around 3 to 5 seconds to load before you can select your next action. Same goes for when the attacks are being executed. It takes a sweet time to execute every move, and this is a big no-no for a handheld RPG. It stalls fights, making them last longer than they should. The thing is, handhelds are more of a pick-up, play for 5 minutes, then stop. It shouldn't require you to have a full section of time to invest for you to get through a few fights. The thing is that I don't hate this game. I don't want to hate this game, and I simply don't completely and utterly hate this game. The problem is that the game is ruthlessly hard for all the wrong reasons. It doesn't think twice to cut off your arm if you don't have a backup plan. It's a fundamentally sound game. The controls work great, the puzzles are well made, and the combat engine itself is very good. My problem is that the monster recruitment system is such an integral part of the game that it artificially makes the game harder in a cheap way, rather than using challenging puzzles or boss fights to make the game, more difficult. Overall, Lufia Ruins of Lore is big this month. I like Lufia and Lufia 2, but Ruins of Lore is just an okay game. It has so many annoyances that it trips over itself. If you're a fan of the series and want to see the whole story, then I definitely go pick it up. For everyone else, you can use that same $25 to pick this game up on a lot better games. This outright got me pissed off because I wanted to love this game because I love those other Lufia games, such as The Fortress of Doom and Rise of the Sinistrals, but I flat out just couldn't. Overall, I'm gonna give this a 6 out of 10.